A very good evening to all the lovely children. It's children's bedtime treasury with Let Emotions Speak. Today's story is Lucy and the Green Door. Lucy Jenkins lived in an ordinary house, in an ordinary street, in an ordinary town. At the back of Lucy's house was an ordinary garden with ordinary flowers and an ordinary path. But down the path, at the bottom of the garden, was a tree that was not ordinary at all. It was a huge old oak tree, and at the bottom of the tree was a very small green door, only just big enough for Lucy to squeeze through. This was Lucy's secret, because only she knew about the door. But what lay behind the door was Lucy's best secret of all. Each afternoon, Lucy would go down the garden path and knock lightly on the door. On the third knock, the door would swing open wide, and the chief elf would be there to welcome her inside. "Come inside, little Lucy," the elf would always say, "and have some tea." Inside, Lucy would meet some very special friends indeed. First, there were Penelope and Geraldine, two of the gentlest and sweetest fairies it was possible to imagine. Then there were Basil and Granville, who were rather mischievous imps, but who made Lucy laugh with their tricks and jokes. And there were the storytellers, who would sit for hours with Lucy and tell her the greatest tales from all the corners of the world. And of course, there was the chief elf, who would make the most delicious milkshakes and scones with heaps of cream for Lucy to eat. The world behind the green door was a wonderful place, and Lucy would always go home afterwards feeling very cheerful and jolly. On one particular visit to the world behind the green door, Lucy had just finished a scrumptious tea of cocoa and tasted marshmallows with the chief elf when she went off to play games with Basil and Granville. They were playing blind man's buff, and Lucy roared with laughter as Basil sneaked up on the blindfolded Granville and tickled him in the ribs, making him squeal and beg for the teasing to stop. Now, just recently, Lucy had been feeling down in the dumps because very soon she would be going to school and would only be able to visit her friends at weekends. But they assured her that they would never forget her, and that as long as she was always a true friend to them, she could visit as often or as little as she liked. This cheered Lucy up considerably, and then they took her to visit the storyteller so that her happiness was complete. Of all the delights behind the green door, the storytellers were Lucy's favorite. They told her stories of how the whales had learned to sing, and of where the stars went when the sun had risen in the sky and they had slipped from view. Because of the assurances of the fairies, Lucy was not too worried when the day finally came for her to join all the other boys and girls of her age at school. Every day Lucy would go to school and then afterwards would visit her friends behind the green door. As winter came round and the days grew dark, she only visited at weekends and looked forward to the holidays when she could visit them every day once more. Meanwhile, at school, Lucy had made friends with a girl called Jessica. And although she told Jessica all about her family and her home, she didn't at first tell her about her extraordinary tree with the little green door and the magic world that lay beyond. Lucy didn't tell Jessica all the stories that she was told by the storytellers. However, and Jessica grew more and more curious about where she had heard all the wonderful tales. Every day, Jessica would ask more and more questions, and Lucy found it more and more difficult to avoid telling her about her secret. Eventually, Lucy gave in and told Jessica all about her adventures behind the green door. Jessica scoffed and laughed when Lucy told her about the chief elf, Aunt Basil, Granville, Penelope, and Geraldine. She howled with laughter at the thought of the wonderful teas and the stories that followed. Jessica thought that Lucy was picking the whole thing up. When Lucy protested and said it was true, Jessica told her that it simply wasn't possible, that there was no such thing as elves and fairies and imps and strange and wonderful worlds behind doors and trees. Lucy was distraught and decided to take Jessica to the green door. On the way home, Lucy started to worry. What if she really had imagined it all? But if her wonderful friends didn't exist, how could she possibly know them? Jessica walked beside Lucy, still teasing her and laughing about Lucy's invisible friends. When Lucy and Jessica reached the bottom of the garden, Lucy was about to tap lightly on the green door at the bottom of the oak tree when she suddenly noticed the door had disappeared. She rubbed her eyes and looked again, but it simply wasn't there. Jessica smirked and laughed at Lucy, calling her silly and babyish to believe in magic and fairy tales, and then ran off back down to the road to school. Lucy could not face going back to school that afternoon. When her mother saw her enter the house, she thought she must be ill. She looked so upset. Lucy went to bed early and cried herself to sleep. And when Lucy slept, she started to dream. The chief elf, Basil, and Granville, Penelope, and Geraldine, and the storytellers were all there in her dream. Then Penelope and Geraldine stepped forward and hugged Lucy, and the hug was so real that Lucy began to hope it wasn't a dream. Then they all hugged her and asked why she hadn't been to see them for so long, and why they had not been able to reach out to her except now in the deepest of sleeps. Lucy explained what had happened on her last visit and told them all about Jessica, and then Geraldine spoke. "Little Lucy," she said, "you are special. You believe in magic and you believe in the little people. And because you believe, you are able to see us and live among us. But those who don't believe will always be shut out from our world. You must keep your belief, little Lucy." With a huge surge of happiness, Lucy woke up, dressed quickly, and ran out of her ordinary house, down the ordinary path, in the ordinary garden, up to the extraordinary tree, and was delighted to see the green door once more. She knocked very lightly, and after the third tap, the door swung open to reveal the chief elf. "Come inside, little Lucy," the elf said happily, "and have some tea." Hope you liked the story. So kids, what did you learn from this story? Magic comes to those who believe in them. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Stay with me for more bedtime stories. Good night and sleep well.